Welcome back to the Four Gardens podcast. I'm Jake Ipshin. The Four Gardens is an approach to cultivate a life of balance, joy, and abundance by focusing on four key areas. On this show, I talk to people inspiring me in those areas of health, nature, creativity, and service. To learn more, go to fourgardenspodcast.com and follow at Four Gardens Podcast on Instagram. Make sure to like and subscribe to hear new episodes and support this project. Take a minute to check out our YouTube channel as well. We've just posted a number of really engaging video clips from the podcast, as well as other content. Make a comment, like, and subscribe. It all really helps. My guest today is Katya Stepanov, co-founder of Inheritance Project. Katya is a Belarusian-Jewish-American facilitator, speaker, writer, director, actor, and immersive experience designer who trains and works with leaders, individuals, and organizations to build understanding across cultural divides and guide authentic social change. I've enjoyed collaborating with Katya and Inheritance Project in the past with my business, Engaged Ecology. I'm so inspired by the creative and authentic way her and her team approach diversity and inclusion. I'm thrilled to learn more about Katya. Let's jump right in. Katya, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you, Jake. I love your intro song. It makes me want to dance immediately.
It's actually become our sort of sonic marker. It's some free royalty music we have, but we also cut a little short clip of that for our YouTube videos, a little intro Ari made for the YouTube. And so I've been learning about how just different brands have sonic indicators that go with them. And so we've kind of stumbled into using it. Thanks for liking it.
Yeah, one of the first things that we always do in an Inheritance Project workshop is follow the leader, and we always start with music and movement. So as soon as you started playing that, I was like, here we go.
Right on. Yeah, and you and I share some music, love of music and dance. And I really enjoyed seeing you this fall in New York City. We got to dance outside in the park. We did 5 rhythms. I saw you at Ecstatic Dance. And it's really joyful to connect with you on the dance floor.
You know, I meet most of my closest friends on the dance floor. In fact, fun fact, I met both Mallory and Ariel, my two co-founders of the Inheritance Project, on dance floors. And I met my co-founder of Rebis, my storytelling company, in school, but also on a dance floor. So I think it's a common theme in my life that if I want to find great collaborators, I can always tell I'm going to enjoy collaborating with someone if we can move together. And if we have that kind of freedom of expression and play right from the beginning, it's a nonverbal understanding that I think deepens every conversation that you have afterwards. So highly recommend, 10 out of 10, go find people on a dance floor and make businesses with them.
You know, I've danced my way into the same principle. I realized the same thing, that I met 2 of the 5 people I work with, or 7, I think by the end, through dancing at Engaged Ecology. So Andrew, who co-founded it with me, and then Tori, I met them both at the same time on a 5 rhythms dance floor. And I had my own, the way you articulated it was perfect, but I realized, yeah, if someone's willing to be vulnerable that way and dance, and dancing, we're talking about conscious, sober dancing too, where they're willing to meet me and dance and take that chance and have that embodiment, enjoy it. It just was a lot. It tested for a lot of qualities that were better than an interview, better than a verbal, what I would hear, what I could feel on the dance floor was so meaningful.
Maybe that should be something that people consider as they change their interview practices in the future, that there's a whole movement chemistry read. Okay, now let's dance.
Yeah, we're dance break time.
Yeah.
That's good. And lately I've been opening the podcast by asking people about what their personal mission is, and having them describe really what they're passionate about creating in the world and working on right now. So I want to pass that question to you to jump in deeper here.
Yes, it's a big question. And there's, of course, the 3-hour-long version and the 10-second version. So I know we have time to dive into it today. But what I'll say in short is that my mission in this world is connected very intimately with storytelling. I believe that stories are the way that we understand ourselves and the world. whether it's the stories that we inherited about ourselves or what we were taught to believe about ourselves, and also what we're taught to believe about the world and other people. And so for me, telling more meaningful stories and allowing people the opportunity to tell their own story authentically is my mission in life. So be it inviting someone into an experience where they have a chance to actually understand what their story is, or they get to participate in a story and in that process discover something about themselves, or if it's writing better stories so that people can actually see themselves represented in the media that they consume. Because I know for myself, I'm an immigrant from Belarus, and I came here when I was 2 years old. And every narrative that I saw about Russian immigrants in American media were very painful narratives, full of trauma, full of chaos, full of, either you're a prostitute or a spy or a combination of those two things, or you're evil. And that really colored the way that I saw myself when I was growing up. And I found it really disheartening that I couldn't see myself in any media that I consumed. So I felt like I needed to erase that part of my identity if I wanted to be happy, if I wanted to belong, because every narrative I saw about happy people were just white Americans in every single piece of media that I watched from Disney onwards, right? So for me, that's where this mission really was born, is that I started watching TV as a very young child, started learning English through watching these movies. And I thought these are very specific narratives that the entire world consumes. How do we change them to make them more inclusive and more authentic and more accurate? So I would say that everything I do stems from this mission.
So that's built up to Inheritance Project, but I'm hearing too how this has been part of you since you were a child, this awareness of I'm hearing you say the sort of damaging narratives that are out there that are limiting so many different groups in this country. We have so much diversity in the USA, and to have so few groups celebrated with positive protagonists, with storylines that celebrate unique cultural gifts or wisdom people are bringing from their traditions. Like that's been it sounds like that's been growing in your awareness since you were a child, and that's taking you through, because you've been in creatively expressed, right? Your background is share a little bit about your theater background, your work, that's kind of bringing you into Inheritance Project.
Yeah, happily. And, it's really awesome that we're having this conversation, because I'll share about my background and then I want to circle back to this connection between diversity in humans and diversity in nature, and how when we don't intentionally make space for diversity, be it diverse wildlife or diverse narratives or diverse people or diverse perspectives, we're actually all losing in the long run. Um, and I think that that's something that I'd love to circle back to and talk about with you, about how that also relates to literal gardening and ecology. Because I think there's a big parallel. These things are all really, really connected. And what I'll say is that, yes, I'll tell you in brief that I immigrated when I was a child as a Jewish refugee, and we immigrated to New Jersey. And I was always very creatively expressed. Like my mom would say that I came out of the womb dancing and singing and drawing on the walls and having an uncontrollable amount of energy. And because my parents were immigrants who didn't speak any English and really needed to figure out how to exist in America when I was a child, they needed for me to be occupied, right? They needed to do something with me. And from a very young age, they realized that I wanted to be creative. I wanted to dance, I wanted to sing, I wanted to play piano. So I organically became a storyteller from the age of 3, when my parents put me in a Latin ballroom dance class. So I was a professional Latin ballroom dancer from the age of 3 until the age of 13. And that's the first way that I started to understand storytelling, was storytelling with the body, which makes sense, which links back to where we started this conversation. Why is the dance floor so important to me? And is the space where I can most fully express myself, is because it's the first way that I learned to express as a child was through movement. Um, and then I understood that I really wanted to do more than just dance and compete. Um, Stories taught me how to speak English and how to understand the world around me because I didn't speak English until I was 4 or 5. I needed to understand what was going on around me from the world of feeling. And this is where I think my empathy was born is I needed to understand, what are these people saying to my parents? What do they really want? How do I serve the situation so that I can help everyone understand each other? And because I spoke English first, it translated into me using this emotional capacity of analyzing what was going on around me in the world to help my parents in various situations, be it at the checkout line, in a Walmart where the cashier is trying to get something specific for my mom and she has like no idea what she's saying, and I am 7 years old and I'm translating. I'm trying to make sure that they understand each other. And I think this origin point of me realizing, wow, people really don't understand each other's backgrounds. Like they don't understand that they're seeing the world in two completely opposite ways. And there needs to be a bridge. And that bridge can take the form of many things. It could take the form of a movie where you watch a movie about an immigrant Russian family and they're humanized to you because you see how they are just like you, or they're struggling with the same issues and going through the same, struggles that anyone would go through no matter what background they're from. Like what is the human element that connects us? That became my obsession, my fascination. So from dance, I moved into theater because understanding people for me meant how can I become these people so that I can understand them better? So how can I use acting as this practice of deep empathy and compassion for people who may be completely different from me. So maybe I need to play a character that's an abused woman from the South who has a completely different background and narrative and life story to me. How can I immerse myself in this character so that I can understand why she does things that she does, why she says things that she says? And this practice, I was drawn to it, from the youngest age. I was like, I really want to help people understand themselves and each other. And the best way to do that is put these people on, right? Act like them, try to understand why they do what they do. Um, so this led me into high school. I started doing musical theater. I thought I was going to be on Broadway. I'm not saying that still won't happen. You never know. But I kind of combined my love of dance and acting, and I also am a singer and I love singing. So I was like, oh, perfect. I'll be a musical theater actor. This is how I will change the world. I will go be on Broadway and inspire people and, touch their hearts the way that I was touched by the shows that I saw when I was a child.
What
Um,
did that transition? I want to pause you for 1 second.
yeah.
Just ask about that transition because I'm hearing you say that you were kind of naturally on stage. Developed this almost as a survival. The acting,
Yes.
the embodiment was a survival tool for you to really help your parents. You were playing a really important role of translation and it took a lot of the same. And I was hearing it took a lot of the same intelligence areas and skills that you were building already. So when you made that transition into the high school theater, the drama world, what did that feel like? Was it really natural for you, or was it like, did it just seem to flow right into it, or what was that recognition like?
It's a great question. You know, if I really follow the path linearly, I didn't understand that actually wanted to be on stage until I saw other people doing it. So I think I knew I wanted to be a storyteller. I knew I wanted to be a dancer, but even dancing, it wasn't the kind of dance class that I think a lot of my American friends went to, where it was like, we all dance together and we do a show and everyone gets a gold star. No, I was a competitive Latin ballroom dancer, so it was about winning. And I think I didn't understand that trapped me for a very long time until I was like 12, 13 years old, and I started to understand that this world I was in, this Latin ballroom competitive world, was not a world I wanted to participate in. Like it really put a lot of pressure on you to perform in a very specific way, to be winning awards. It wasn't dance for dance's sake. It wasn't like, expression and creativity. And so I had some traumatic experiences, honestly. I developed a severe eating disorder. I felt so much pressure to win, and a lot of it was because I wanted my parents' whole journey to America to be worth it. Like, the award that I wanted to win wasn't even for me, really. It was like my mom and dad put so much money into these costumes and paying these fees and getting me into dance classes and getting me into these competitions that if I don't win, it's all for nothing, you know? And so that world started to fall apart for me, and I started to realize I didn't want to be a part of it. And I went to see some plays that the high school was putting on. And I remember sitting in the audience and seeing, I think it was Will Rogers' Follies that they were doing, and this beautiful production that I watched for 2 hours. And I saw for the first time, I think this is the key. For the first time, I saw people like me. I saw kids my age on stage performing, in this free, expressive way. Like, they just looked like they were having the time of their lives. And I was like, I want to be there. Like, that's what I really want. I actually want to tell stories. I don't want to be a competitive ballroom dancer. I don't want to be a competitive piano player. I don't want to compete. I want to use these talents and skills to change people's lives, to show them themselves, to show them a scene that they didn't expect. And then they're sitting in the audience and they're crying and they're realizing, oh, wow, I behave that way, or that's just like me. And that cathartic experience. So in Greek, amphitheater actually means the space that we go to see both ways. And that is the key for me. That's really my mission, is to create spaces where we can see both ways, where we see
Wow.
ourselves, we see each other, and in that dialogue we change, right? We have a transformation. We're like, wow, I didn't never think about this, or I completely felt that character's experience while they were going through it. So for me, seeing that play, that lit a fire inside me, and I said, I think I want to be on stage. And I started auditioning for the plays in my high school. And that's, I can tell you that story. It's a fun story,
Sure. Yeah.
how I got my first role. I think it's actually a really fun anecdote. I don't know if we have time for it, but I'm
Yeah,
happy to.
let's hear it.
It's a huge defining moment in my life, for
Yes.
sure. Um, so I went to Fairlawn High School in New Jersey. That's where I immigrated to from Belarus. Was Teaneck and then Fairlawn, which is lovingly known by my friends and people who live in New Jersey as Little Russia. So I really grew up in like a Russian Jewish enclave inside of New Jersey, where being Russian was pretty normal. So that's something interesting, because I didn't really fully understand that I had a unique identity until I went to college in Pittsburgh. And that's the first time that people were like, "Wow, you're Russian. That's so unique." I was like, "What? That's everyone's an immigrant." I just really felt like that was a normal thing in America. Um, and so I was an eighth grader. I had just seen the play Will Rogers' Follies. I was so inspired. I signed up to audition for my school musical. And the musical that we were supposed to do that year was Nine. And I don't know if anyone listening to this is a theater person, but Nine is a musical about a man who has 9 affairs. And the board of directors, after this was announced and cast, they were like, you can't do this play in a high school. So the material is too risque, So the board of whoever makes these decisions, I don't even know who made this decision, but they were like, you can't do Nine. Somehow, instead of Nine, my director was allowed to do Cabaret. Cabaret is infinitely more risque. The characters are actually prostitutes. They do hard drugs on stage. There's rape, there's abortion. I mean, it's a really dark and really powerful play. I love Cabaret. I think it is one of the best musicals ever written, because it goes into so many deep topics, but it is very unusual for a high school to get to do this show. Um, anyway, somehow
Very differentiating.
they allowed this to happen. I have no idea. My musical theater director, John Gerisi, deserves his own award for the dedication that he put in his life towards creating an incredible program for young people, for high school students to embody these really intense roles and learn about themselves. So I think he was my first teacher of how you can put people through a somatic experience and transform them from the inside out. And anyways, the point is that we had to have a recasting. I was in the ensemble of 9. I was excited to be in the ensemble, but there was this opportunity to re-audition for this totally new play, except that the audition started 30 minutes before my middle school ended on the last day of school. So I already am late to the audition. I'm a middle schooler auditioning for a high school musical. I'm so scared. I've literally never been in the high school before this audition. I'm like 20 minutes late. I'm finding the room. I get there and it's a dance audition. So I have this wave of relief because I'm a dancer, right? I'm like, oh, I can do this. I can quickly figure out, this choreography and dance and do this audition. And so I start learning it. I don't even know what the musical is yet. At some point, somebody tells me, oh, this is the audition for Cabaret. And I realize, okay, at least that's the play that we're supposed to be auditioning for. Like I have no knowledge of what is going on. And then we learn the combination and the director says, okay, we're going to do it this way where you are going to go in 4 at a time. And each time I'm going to tell you who didn't make it and who stays. So it was this very intense environment, right? Like,
Oh yeah.
whoa, 4 at a time. Everyone wants it. We're all like doing our best. Anyway, I perform with my 4 friends I don't know yet around me, and I don't get cut. And I have this moment where I'm like, wow, I'm actually going to be like a Kit Kat girl in this musical. I'm going to have a real role. It's going to be such an upgrade from being in the ensemble of the previous play that I was cast in. And then the whole audition passes, and at the end, he says, okay, everyone can go home except for, and he calls 3 names, and he says my name. And I fully think that I'm hallucinating because I'm 13. I'm a middle schooler. I'm just like, I'm making it up. So I get my stuff together and I go to leave. And someone around me is like, are you Katya? And I'm like, yeah. And she's like, he said your name. You should follow him. And I have this revelation that actually this is really happening in real life. And I go to this other room and these senior girls go into this room one by one and do something. I have no idea what's going on. Finally, it's my turn and I come in and he says, have you ever sang the song Cabaret? And I say, no, I have no idea. I didn't even know I was auditioning for Cabaret until I got here this afternoon. And he's like, okay, well, I'll play it for you and I want you to try singing it. And we have this one-on-one moment. And I think this is really important because I think everyone, no matter if they're an artist or a writer or a scientist, you need that person who believes in you, who sees you, and says, I'm going to give you a chance to change your life. Like, you need that. And
Yes.
I think, if you're listening to this later, it's like, how can you be that person for someone else?
Wow.
I'm going to cry now, but he changed my life because he said, okay, let's sing this song. And I sang it and he looked at me and he said, okay, here's the deal. Here are all of the songs in this musical. I need you to go home and learn them. And next week, you're going to come back and you're going to sing them. And we'll see if you get this part. And by the way, this is the lead of the play. And I think you have a good chance of getting it. And my whole world completely transformed in that moment, right? I said, holy shit, like, this is a chance of a lifetime, my first chance of a lifetime,
Yes.
And I go home and I learn the whole show. I think I listened to the recording of Cabaret like 400 times. I learn every note in the show. I am such an overachiever. I come back the next week, I sing the whole show, and he says, it's yours. I'm casting you. I'm going to give you the lead in the musical. I'm not even a freshman in high school yet. This is one of those moments, where you're like, oh my God, how is this really happening to me in this moment? And so that's how I entered high school. I entered high school. Everyone knew I was cast in the musical. It was this whole drama, like unheard of. I'm 13 years old. I'm going to play someone that I should definitely not be playing at that age. And it was kind of the only thing people could even talk about in the intermission. But it's one of the only musicals that my high school sold out all 4 shows in all of the history of musical theater at Fairlawn High School, and being a part of this production, it solidified for me that this is something that I really wanna do, and that we can become vessels for storytelling, telling the kinds of stories that shock people and change people's entire understanding of the world. And I think for a lot of those high school students, watching Cabaret was probably the first time that they saw people their age grappling with themes of abortion, themes of drug use, of, World War II, the Holocaust, homosexuality, etc. There's even people in drag in the show. I mean, it's a really progressive play. So to have the opportunity to do a play with so many themes at that age really changed my life. I became a performer from that point on. I was in every show moving forward, and that's what made me believe that I could be an actor professionally, and why I chose to audition for musical theater programs. Me getting into Carnegie Mellon University is a whole other story about how my life was totally changed last minute, because I also didn't get into the program until the last possible moment. And the only reason that I ended up being accepted to Carnegie Mellon School of Drama, which is one of the best programs in the United States, is because someone else who looked like me decided to go to a different program, and I got in. So there's so many of these last minute moments of fate that I think my life is constructed out of.
Yeah, I love it. And I just feel inspired hearing it though, too, because I want to reflect back that hearing the first part of your story is really moving around the painful competitions you were having to drop out of, giving up on this dance you've been working so hard on, the competitive like emptiness you were feeling around that. I was my word, but and then even before that, of you were acting to survive, but I'm just witnessing how you brought that your fire, your passion for it into, like you talk about being an overachiever and learning every part of Cabaret, but I'm just seeing how that the goal was, yes, it was like personal. There was I'm hearing like the pride you have in that too, but also that then you got to really tell a story, really do your, like, it allowed you to, like, that energy you brought and that fire you brought allowed you to the amphitheater mission, tell
Mhm.
the story of get to like live your your gift. You have to live your gift on this big stage. And then again, it sounds like it happened to Carnegie Mellon. Yeah, it's really inspiring to see how you took that or those early challenges and wove them into your, like how they formed you and how you found meaning though later. It sounded like that cabaret experience was really a taste of meaning too for you, that role was a really juicy role.
Definitely, definitely. And I think it was like when you're given a pair of shoes that are too big for you, but somebody else trusts that you're going to grow into those.
Yes.
And I think
Trust.
that's really important in life in general. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. How do you step into your next bigger size pair of shoes, right? And say, I can do this. Um, and I think that it's a little bit, yes, it's me and me working on it and me wanting it bad enough to put that time in. But I think actually this is the first time I'm realizing, as you reflected back, that that was my first opportunity to play a character that I really wanted to play, irrespective of who I was,
Mm.
irrespective of being Russian, Jewish, white, blonde. It didn't matter. I got to play a character that in the real world I would have never even been seen for.
I feel that. So that was something then I think we talked before this a little. We talked about Dieter before and how embodying a character is a really important part of your career, important part of the work you do. So that was that first time was a cabaret, a character you wanted to. Yeah, what did that mean to you?
I think it was one of the first times that I had to grapple with the complexity of how trauma affects us as human beings. I think there's actually a much clearer link between me as an actor and me creating Inheritance Project than it might seem from the outside. A lot of the time people meet me and they're like, well, are you an actor or are you a facilitator? You know, and they get confused. But actually, they're really linked. They're very similar skill sets because in order to play Sally Bowles, I needed to understand why she's an addict. I needed to understand why she makes the choices that she makes. And I needed to understand, you know, that a lot of the time, the way that humans cope with their trauma is to mask it or numb it or avoid it. And it leads them to make choices that they wouldn't have made if they had had an opportunity to work through that trauma. And, you know, Sally Bowles is the first traumatized character I played in a series of traumatized characters. A lot of the characters that I end up playing are people who have huge transformations because I think I understand it on an innate level because I inherited a great deal of trauma from my lineage, from, you know, years of oppressed people, be it oppressed by the, you know, landowner that the serfs that my father's lineage worked under were oppressed by, whether it was Stalin, Lenin, pick your dictator, you know, pick your dictator, choose your war. That's kind of like my whole family history. And I was grappling with all of this at a very young age, and I felt really lonely and disconnected from most of my classmates and from most of the people that were my friends even, because I felt like they weren't carrying that level of intensity inside them, and I felt like I needed an outlet to grapple with a great deal of inherited trauma and challenges and being an immigrant, and theater is a great playground. It's like a gym for that. It's a great gym in which you can cathartically work through all of these complex emotions that you have inside yourself. And I think that's why the curriculum that we create with Inheritance Project is experiential and is rooted in personal storytelling and is working to connect your narrative, your story, your feelings, and your body, and allow you to actually move through these experiences that you hold inside yourself and allow them to be spoken and expressed. So it doesn't need to be just through words. Like you can express a trauma that you're carrying through movement. You can express it through writing. You can speak it. You can sing it. You can do so many different things with it that are all great options. What I'm hoping to help the world do is stop stifling it, avoiding it, not looking at it, and unconsciously passing it on to your offspring. Because that's what ends up happening when we don't have an outlet, when we don't have somewhere that we can work through the jungle that's inside us, you know? And I think that theater was that for me. I know that it could be something totally different for somebody else. Um, but I actually think I was very lucky that I ended up in the theater world because it saved my life. I don't know who I would have been if I didn't have that space to work through all those different things.
Mm. Your story's having a lot of impact on me. I'm just hearing it, and you telling your story is reminding me of why. You know, like your own story is an example of why storytelling to me, why you care about it, because the way you tell it is it's having a lot of impact on me, and it's bringing up to me just how part of the work I want to do in the world and with this podcast too is explore, go deeper below the surface level identities that were presented. So much of branding, personal branding now, and what's on the website is copy. You know, it's not, we can't tell the trauma stories. We can't tell the, like, that's something I love about Inheritance Project. The fact that, and I love seeing how seamlessly it comes out of theater and drama for you, but it's like, it's so natural, that transition to what it is of growing a space where we can go deeper below surface identities into ancestral traumas, into these strong feelings that when we're all living in this careful, it's still safe and regenerative what you're doing. But when it's muted, when reality is muted, when we can only be this work identity that we have, is professional. I feel like a lot of workplaces can be very limiting that I've experienced around what part of me I'm allowed to bring. Especially I'm imagining this for people that have experienced more trauma and oppression than I have. Like the more there is, like I felt that for me, and I feel like I'm walking with a lot of privilege in my life, and I'm walking with being seen more than others. Um, and I can just, and yet I still have traumas I don't feel safe bringing. So I can
Mhm.
imagine like the level that can extend you for people who are living with oppression in our country today, who are oppressed in their workplace right now by systems of white supremacy, of colonialism, of things like that. That I imagine that those part of that identity restriction is keeping some of those exploitative, damaging, traumatizing systems in place. So now I'm getting inspired and processing this out loud too. But I'd love to hear your take. And I love that we're jumping into Inheritance Project work now
Yeah.
too. So I'd love to hear
Well,
your response.
here's the thing. If we suppress one emotion, or if we're numbing one thing, we're numbing everything. That is the sad truth. And that's why we feel trapped. And when we feel like we need to put away our authentic emotions or whatever we're going through, or our true self, when we feel like, oh, I'm not allowed to be complex because I'm being profiled as whatever limiting narrative someone's putting on me is, whether I'm seen as a worker or a boss or a mom, or, whatever. Essentially, something try to we're trying to change with Inheritance Project is the idea that anyone is just one thing. We are all multidimensional, complex beings. We are more than just our gender, just our color, just our creed, just our country that we're from, just our culture that we participate in. We are an intersection of all of these things all working together. And on top of that, we're carrying all of this inherited trauma and inherited beliefs from the people who raised us. So it's a really wild jungle in there. And a lot of the time, we don't feel like we're allowed to be that jungle. We're like, no, in this environment, I need to just be a sunflower, and it's like, if I suppress everything that's going on in conflict with the sunflower, not only am I being inauthentic to myself, but also the people that I'm connecting with or trying to connect with are losing out on all of the vines. I'm going to keep going with this metaphor, but it's like there's so many vines. All these vines are opportunities for connection and for healing with each other. But if we don't show each other the jungle that is inside of us, then how are we ever supposed to heal or connect? We're all just like putting on masks and saying, I'm fine. I'm this person in this environment. And we're stifling, yes, we're stifling the pain, but we're also stifling the joy. We're also stifling pleasure. We're also stifling all of these other beautiful aspects of who we are. And I think it's because as a society, we're allergic to feeling. And I think that's the other deeper exercise of both acting and storytelling and connecting and having authentic conversations and letting our guard down, is that the moment that we let our guard down or we let ourselves be seen, it means we are going to feel. We're going to feel our feelings and whatever those feelings are. And if, as a society, feelings are seen as a sign of weakness, which is what the white colonialist patriarchy teaches us, right? Men don't cry, don't get emotional, like stifle yourself is pretty much what the patriarchy wants from you so that you can
Yes.
be a worker, right? Because if you don't do that, then you're hard to control. If you allow yourself to be seen in all of your complexity, then nobody can put you in a box. And that goes against the system and order that we've inherited. So I think a huge mission of Inheritance Project is to literally break those boxes, to say you are not any one of these identities. You have inherited this jungle, and it's actually what makes you beautiful. It's actually what makes you a divine, wonderful human being with so much complexity inside of you. So this is also coming back to the the jungle and the garden and the diversity conversation,
Let's
which
talk
is
about
like,
this.
if we want everyone to be the same, then we are creating monoculture, literally. Monoculture as humans, which is what whiteness is. Whiteness is just a monoculture. It's
Yes.
like, let's eradicate all diversity. Let's make all these plants into corn. And then we're going to have rows of corn. And then we're going to produce all the corn in the world, you know? And it's like, what we see when we do that, I'd love for you to speak to this. Like, what
Yes.
happens when you monocrop in a forest, right? Or you have, like, we were in Costa Rica last year and we saw the rows and rows of palm trees, right, for the palm oil, when there were like palm oil
Yeah.
factories. And so there's no more jungle. It's just like rows of palm trees, and you're driving by and your heart like breaks looking at it, because you're like, this is unnatural. Like, this is not listening to the intelligence of how nature is designed. It's going against nature, and it's like trying to control nature. And I feel like that's also what's happening in our society, is this attempt to control the diversity that is organic within us. So the philosophy that we have is that diversity is beautiful. It's actually what makes everything resilient. If you have a diverse team, that means you have a team of people who all think differently from each other. So you're going to have so many more perspectives, more ways to access that topic than if you had a table of 5 people who all think the same way. You know, and I know a lot of focus of diversity is about how things look or how people look, but I actually think diversity is so much deeper than that. You can have 5 people who all look super different, who all grew up in the same town, went to the same college, have the same career, and think the same way. But like, you can have that, you know? That's not actually really diversity either. So diversity is much deeper than what we look like. Diversity is like bringing people together who all have completely different life experiences, so that everyone can benefit from learning about each other's experience and deepen their own understanding of themselves and other people. And I think in a garden, it's similar. I mean, I don't know that much. That's why I want to pass to you. But I am reading Braiding Sweetgrass, which is an incredible
Great
book,
book.
and I love it so much. And even just the chapter on the 3 sisters, how
Mhm.
3 different crops work together to help each other grow. They're all completely different from one another, but they work best as a team, not as separate monocrop plants.
The
So,
classic, yeah, the classic polyculture garden for sure. Classic guild. I call it a guild. Is the Three Sisters, but I don't want to lose track of the jungle, the emotional jungle. Maybe you and I need to make a workshop sometime
yeah.
on the emotional jungle, how that fits with the garden, because yeah, I really, this is really resonating with me. I mean, you're really speaking my language, obviously, when you get into gardens and monoculture and polyculture. And I feel your sadness looking at all these expanses of corn or a palm that where there used to be a jungle and it's been stripped away and limited. And for sure, I want to grow a world of diversity. And that's permaculture principles designed with diversity. Diverse systems are more resilient systems in permaculture. That's just, and that's the fact with most types of designs. And you mentioned it with your
Why?
5 people. Why is it more diverse? That's a great
Yes.
question. Yeah, why is it more diverse? And I think that getting into that too of, well, I'm gonna answer that question, and I want to name too that I'm seeing how the garden is that the garden is attended. You talk about the human being, how complex we are, and the garden being a way of seeing that, the garden being an ecosystem of many parts. And those parts are many plants in the garden. Like in an actual garden, diversity, different plants have different benefits for each other, right? So one plant might keep away pests from another. Another plant might fix the soil. You might have beans fixing your soil. So take a Three Sisters garden, right? The beans that are growing up the corn are adding nitrogen to the soil for the corn. You have the squash as a ground cover, which is actually the fourth. Yeah, we do a fourth sister too, but the squash is covering the ground in Three Sisters, and it's preventing the soil from drying out. You know, each plant, each person, each perspective has its own value that it brings to the collective.
Mhm.
And I think that, yeah,
And am I right that when you separate them, then you need to find synthetic ways of replicating what would have organically happened with these 3 plants working together? Am I right?
chemicals can take the place of some of these pest prevention or fertilizers.
So this is actually a great bridge to talking about people, because also when you, yeah, you can monocrop people, you can try to make everyone the same.
Right.
Then in order to sustain them in the way that they would have been sustained in community or in diversity, you need to do it synthetically. And that is not sustainable long term. You can't fake you can't fake diversity. I'm like, you just can't do it. You know, there's just so much benefit to keeping things diverse. But I think there's a nuance, because I think sometimes people think, well, if I just let my garden go wild, you know, it'll die. Like weeds will take over all of it, and, you know, it'll just become untenable or uncontrollable. Like, what would you, is that true? This is a question I have.
I'm well, at least in the metaphor I'm working with of the garden for personal cultivation, I I believe there's tending and guiding. We pilot our gardens one way I just heard it expressed. The garden being something that we're guiding, we're stewarding these things.
Hmm.
So there's a balance that we're striking between order and chaos of uh, and I think that's a well-tended garden does. The garden is never a closed system in a box. The garden is always influenced by seeds that are blowing in, by wind, by elements. It's not never even a field like one of these giant monoculture fields. They have to deal with the reality that there's always a wild space, or at least I hope there's always a wild space further out. And there'll need
Yeah.
to be where there
Yes.
might be birds that are flying in that are going to eat their seeds, or there's other animals that are going to come in, or other elements. And so I think that there's no the illusion that we can dominate nature is just that it's an illusion. Nature always finds a way to reassert itself, and if we aren't working with nature and working against it, it can be very painful when nature reasserts itself. And it can look like in human beings total burnout. It can look like when our systems, when you know, when we're extracting from ourselves. This is why monoculture is happening. We want to grow as much food as possible to feed our big population or make as much money as possible. Really is what it is with spending the least. And when we do that with humans, we end up with really burnt out and sick humans. And we do the same
Yes.
thing happens in our soil.
And then we're like, no, let's just stimulate them with synthetic stuff to make them grow
Yeah.
better. This is why I'm saying it's a perfect metaphor. And I think it's really important what you said about you still need to tend and cultivate your garden. And the same thing is true about inheritance. I'm not saying let the jungle be wild and set it loose on everyone around you. No, that would also be damaging, right? Instead, it's about, first of all, acknowledging you have a very complex identity. Then it's about understanding what parts is your identity made up of? What stories? So if it was the metaphor of a garden, what plants are growing in my garden? Can I learn the names of all of them? Can I understand how each of them grows? Can I understand who planted each of them there in my garden in the first place? Which is what really following the thread of inheritance is. It's like, okay, I inherited, let's say I even could pick a talent. I inherited my talent of singing. Well, where did that come from? I can actually ask and trace and look for where that seed was planted in me, right? And by doing that, honor all of the ancestors that handed this gift down to me. I can also find in my garden rage, or let's say addiction, right? Or something that, let's call it a weed that if I don't tend to it, will grow and kill other plants in my garden, right? So if I stumble upon something like that, I also need to understand where did it come from? And then I need to make a decision of whether or not I want to let it keep living in my garden. And I think this is the challenging part of grappling with our identity and inheritance, is that our it's not our fault, right? We all inherit a garden. We inherit it. We don't have choice over it. It's not like when we're born, we're like, let me choose all of the things that I want to inherit from my ancestors. Like, unfortunately, we're not there yet. We don't have computers to decide on our genetics just yet. So we're inheriting this garden from somewhere else, from our parents and our grandparents and great grandparents and so on and so forth. So it's not our fault that that garden is in whatever state it is when we inherit it, but it's our responsibility if we want it to be resilient, if we want it to thrive, if we want ourselves to be fully expressed and live our purpose, we need to look at what's in our garden and pull the weeds out and say, okay, I don't want to pass this on. You know, I need to understand the root of this addiction and I need to transform it in myself. And
That's
that is what we're trying to create, is a chrysalis, a container in which you can come to us and you can work on this in community. So you don't have to do it by yourself, you know, because I also think, like you say, cross-pollination is important. You know, I never know what lesson I'm going to learn from talking to someone else about my inherited addictions. I'm going to learn so much more by having that conversation than if I'm doing that work ashamed and alone, you know, in private.
mm. Yeah, I love this. And just for the audience too, who aren't as familiar with your work, I love if you could give some examples from the Inheritance Project programs about how you are creating this space for what you're talking about to happen, and for people to come into their gardens and be aware of them, their inheritance. As you, yeah, I love the
Sure.
inherited garden. Thank you for that.
Well, the number one tool is self-inquiry. So we have a very specific methodology at Inheritance Project. Like you have the 4 gardens, we have 5 different aspects of our methodology. The first is self-inquiry because it's really the root. If I want to understand myself, I need to ask myself questions. I need to actually create a space where I can ask myself and answer. And that can be done in many different ways. It can be done in stream of consciousness writing, which is a tool we use a lot in our workshops, where we'll say, here's 10 minutes. You're going to start writing and you won't stop. And you're going to write everything that comes to mind. You're going to access a flow state. You're going to get underneath your surface level of understanding about, let's say I picked culture, and I'm going to write for 10 minutes about what culture means to me. Which, think about it, how often, like if you think back on your whole education, was there ever a point that your teacher said, okay, now you're going to get a chance to write about how you feel and what culture you think you're a part of? No, like most of us don't ever have this opportunity. So it's us kind of putting pause on the day-to-day and all my tasks and my job and everything and everyone I have to serve and all of my responsibilities, and saying, okay, I'm going to take a moment to understand what culture I feel like I belong to. Through writing, I can do it through speaking, so I can just record myself for 10 minutes. So there's many different ways to access what is waiting to be discovered inside us. All that information is there. And a lot of the time we have to break through resistance. So I meet a lot of people who say, I don't have a culture, I'm American, or I don't know. And a lot of that resistance comes from fear, comes from a feeling like, well, I've never been asked that before, so I don't know what the answer is. But that's not true. It's just that that person hasn't given themselves the opportunity to discover that for themselves yet. And they're losing out on that knowledge if they don't give themselves that chance. So a lot of this process is a process of awakening. It's a process of waking up to what your culture is, what your creed is, what your, you know, how does the color of your skin impact you as a human walking through the world, instead of me coming in and trying to educate you about the history of race, which you can absolutely do on your own if you want to learn about that. It's more important, I believe, to do that self-inquiry for yourself and say, how has being a white woman affected me in my life experience? Because unless I take a moment to reflect on that, I can't discover my privilege. I can't discover, oh, wow, it doesn't really affect me because I fall into the dominant patriarchal white supremacist narrative. You see what I'm saying? Like, I need to actually give myself an opportunity to discover that. I can't access that information if someone else tells me that that's the way I am, or, you know, if I read it in a textbook. So self-inquiry is the first step. After that, we move into embodied learning. So now I've discovered, you know, maybe I've done some self-inquiry and I've discovered that, I'll speak for myself. I've discovered that I have a trauma in my uterus. Like I have a long history of women in my lineage having issues with this area in their body and having issues with, you know, their menstrual cycle or all these different things that are related to that place. Okay, now I can actually understand that I need to have a relationship with this part of my body. And I need to look into what are all the different somatic practices I can do to understand what's going on in there. So, not just keeping it on the level of the mind, but understanding where trauma is carried in our body and what exercises we can do to unearth that, to work with that. This is where the connection between the experiential methodology of Inheritance Project and storytelling and acting are emerged, because there's so many somatic exercises from the world and field and study of acting that I actually think can help anyone. You don't have to be an actor to do this exercise, it will help you anyhow if you try to understand, what's going on in all of the different centers of your body. And then after that, we have actual storytelling. So being able to verbalize what's going on inside our body, what did we discover in our self-inquiry, and the process of being witnessed, being seen and heard when I share this very vulnerable thing about myself. It's still being studied now what the scientific effects are of this, but I can tell you from my emotional experience, there is something so healing about having a safe space in which you can express this to somebody else and have them fully just listening, just seeing, just receiving you, just holding space for you to process. Okay, I have this trauma here. Let me talk through it. Let me tell you the story of it. Let me try to express to you how it feels in my body, right? And then of course there's working with the nervous system after that, and learning what are my triggers, what are my traumas, and how can I start to reprogram my body to respond differently to this stimulus. So if I've inherited a very specific behavioral pattern, for example, like every time that I hear a helicopter, maybe I feel a great deal of fear in my body, because maybe I inherited so many wars, family lineage, that sound is deeply triggering to me. And I've actually met a lot of people who are like, wow, I never thought about it, but that's really true for me too. So how can I then work with my nervous system to, in the moment that I'm hearing that and having that response that I've inherited, how can I notice it and then choose a different breath pattern and start to teach my body that I'm safe, that even though my ancestors were bombed by the Nazis, I am safe in Brooklyn here in my room. I'm safe, right? And teaching my body that, because I think a lot of the time what people don't understand is a lot of the animosity that's expressed, a lot of the hatred that we're seeing in our culture is actually a trauma response. It's actually people not knowing how to regulate their nervous system when they're in an interaction with someone that is touching them in a traumatic place, or is snagging some kind of unexamined inherited aspect or behavior inside them, and they're just not aware of it. So they're defaulting to their inherited behavior, usually something they learned from their family, and they're not even aware they're doing that. So that's pretty much, that's, I hope this is giving you an example of, how we might work with all different aspects of this, but it's so unique to the individual. Like what my processing of my inheritance looks like is going to be completely different from what your processing would look like. We're just laying out the tools, and then how you use the tools is completely specific to you, and what you need to work on and what you need to transform so that you can actually feel like I'm the author of my own story. I am in full awareness of everything I inherited, and I work on these aspects probably for the rest of my life, because it's a lifelong journey. Like we can't just unlearn an inherited behavior in a day. It really takes practice. The same way that you can't grow a garden the moment that you plant a seed, right? You need to water it and tend to it and take care of it, and make
Well,
sure
actually,
it grows.
the first part of gardening and permaculture and the way I teach gardening is observation. The same way
Mm,
you start with self-inquiry, that actually we need to notice what's happening. Where's the sun? You'd be surprised how many people will start gardens in the shade. They haven't looked at the sun for a day or two, just to notice that it's light now, but there's not enough light to do a garden.
exactly.
Or they haven't dug an inch or two down in the soil and seen what's going on down there. Oh, it's all rock there, and it's going to be a lot of work to get soil.
Yes,
We
and
need a new
this is what's
strategy.
happening in the industry. People are like, "We need to learn about inclusion and culture and diversity, and then they go right to like education
Yes.
before they've taken any time to say, where is this living in me?
Yes. How can you receive that? Rhetorically, I'm asking, so how can I receive that powerful history or someone's really vulnerable share if I haven't done that self awareness? I just think all transformational systems, whether working with land or our hearts or our histories, needs to start with self work and grounding. I love that you include nervous system and storytelling in there. Those are really clear. I'm really appreciating your system and your approach here, and I think that the nervous system regulation. So I just went to a diversity and inclusion training last week. And very early in the training, they hit us with very painful history that most of which I was familiar with, but hearing it again of racism in America and hearing it again, it was like, I felt a lot of emotions coming through me again. I had to do some self-regulation work.
Mhm.
I wasn't, it wasn't, the order of things was a little out of whack for me. Like, I think that history is so important. And I think we have this important history that isn't taught well. There's this desire that we have when we know it, or when facilitators know it, to teach with it. But if we're not, I think where you take us, your trajectory of growing to the place where we can hold space for other people, hold space for ourselves, and then be there to hear and witness somebody else's experience. That is the outcome of being able to witness the other people in my world, and see past the conditioning that I've
Mhm.
been received on how to see them, and see past the way they're cast in the play that is my workplace, or the play that is my family, or is my the supermarket, or the street. And like, I think that when you that trajectory feels like the right one to me, in a way to actually get past that contraction I started to feel, that like holding this entire painful history, my own painful history, or somebody else's, and then holding the whole historical. It's a lot of energy and a lot of emotion to just jump into. And I think that's really beautifully, the way you designed it.
Thanks, Jake. And yeah, I mean, you're illustrating, I think, a common problem. And don't want to be misunderstood either, that I'm not saying that education or learning this history isn't important. It is, but it's a sequencing issue. It's a lack of understanding of the human mind and body and psychology,
Yes.
and wanting an outcome that is impossible with the path that is being taken. So the intention is, I'm going to teach this group of people about a history that maybe they've forgotten or they're not integrating into their awareness, etc. But are those people in a state where they can receive and process that information, is the question. And most of the time, the answer is no, because we're not integrating somatic understanding into this work, right? So we think that we can just keep it at the level of the mind, but we can't. It's not possible. And everything that is being studied about the mind body connection right now reveals that there is not really a separation. There are also some things we feel in our body before our mind is even aware that we're feeling those things. So we need to be able to learn really painful history and understand it and hold those truths in our body. And it's much more effective to learn that history after I've understood my own place in the world and my own relationship to that history. So, and this is something I've grappled with a lot. I'm a white, blonde, blue-eyed woman, but I am an immigrant from the Soviet Union. So I have no direct connection to the history of slavery in the United States, for example, right? And yet I need to have awareness of how that history, which is carried in the bodies of so many people who live here, that is coloring the way they view me in the world because of the way I look. But I can only get to that level of understanding by understanding my relationship to that history, so that I don't take it personally, for example, when that comes up in conversation, where I have enough awareness to say, yes, I understand why you might feel a certain way in my presence, because people who looked like me created a lot of trauma for you in your body, right? So there's a way to hold awareness. I think this is another really intricate nuance. Like, everyone is worried about offending or upsetting somebody else in this culture right now. Everyone's like, I'm so scared of being canceled, or everyone's canceling each other, or again, I'm like, that's a trauma response. That's an unwillingness to be in relationship. Because the truth is, if you're going to do this work of working on yourself or unpacking your inheritance or wanting to understand how to heal the great divisions and pain in our society, that means you're going to have to feel. You're going to have to be uncomfortable. There are going to be moments where you want to stop, where you want to shut down, where you want to cancel the whole experience, where you want to say, nope, I don't want to deal with this. I want to go back and numb myself and pretend none of this is happening, right? So if we understand that, it's like a very working on these really painful topics is a very advanced process for your nervous system. So you have to build up to it. It's like you can't just send someone into battle with no training. You know what I mean? Like they're gonna shut down, they're gonna fall apart, and they're gonna run away, or they're gonna die. Like you can't do that to that person. But that's what we're doing to each other all the time. We're like assuming that we've all integrated our nervous system and our trauma enough to have these conversations when we haven't done that at all. And that's why I created Inheritance Project. That's really where the whole seed and all these stories inside me and all my history, I had this revelation. We're all skipping this part of the process, but we can't do that. We need to go through this part of the process so that we can actually get to the point where we can have these really challenging conversations with each other. But until I've done my self inquiry, worked with my nervous system, understood where my triggers are, understood how to regulate my breath in a really intense environment, understood how to ask for what I need in that environment, how to communicate nonviolently. All of these skills, they prepare me for actually having transformative conversations with people or giving me an opportunity to participate in transformative justice. Like I can't even get to that point unless I've taken the time to do all of the previous work, and everyone's in a rush. We all want to just fix it, create the solution, have the conversation, check the box, you know, and be done. But actually, it's a whole beautiful journey of self evolution. And my dream is that we can all hold hands and say, we're going to do this work together. And nobody is exempt from it. Like, even if I am the victim of a traumatic history, I still need to do the work to understand how to regulate my own nervous system when I'm talking about that traumatic history. Otherwise, I can't participate fully. You see what I mean?
Yes. Yeah, I'm really following you, really honoring the journey you're taking people on. The way you're approaching this is really aligned for me with what I'm learning through my work and studies. And I feel like, yeah, I just want to really support this. I'm really grateful that we took the time to make this episode together and to help get the word out about Inheritance Project, and your work. And I'm looking forward to future collaborations as well too with you, because I feel like we're very aligned, and also very good friends with the rest of your team of Mallory and Ariel. So it's been great to work with you guys. And yeah, I just want to also give you a chance to both, at the end here, share how people can get involved with Inheritance Project, what's coming up for you guys. I know you're doing a lot of amazing work. And also just if there's anything else you wanted to add, like last words too, before we close out.
Sure. Thank you. Well, the first thing I'll say is if you're listening to this and you're like, great, I want to do self inquiry, like, where do I start? You can go to inheritanceproject.org and we have a free workbook. The reason we have a free workbook is because I don't believe that starting the process of self inquiry should be behind any kind of paywall. We've created this workbook so that anyone at any time can go and fill it out for themselves. And what I will say is the time that you take to fill it out is the depth to which the workbook will be useful to you. So, if you're approaching it like, all right, I'll take 10 minutes to fly through this, then you're not going to experience the level of depth that you can if you say, I'm going to give myself an hour and really think about each of these questions and let myself write about them in the workbook, right? So that's one caveat. I recommend the workbook, but not as like a, take 5 minutes to do it kind of activity. And then we do have public workshops once a quarter. So our next one will be in March. So you can stay tuned, also sign up for our newsletter. We announce all of our workshops that way. And we're also always creating different guides for people. So guides to having conversations, different exercises. You can follow us on Instagram, and we are about to record a bunch of somatic exercises that people can do with us, which is really exciting. And of course, if you work on a team and you really want to create a strong bond in your team of everyone being able to share their culture and identity with each other, then you can book a call with us and we'll talk about the needs of your business and what your goal is and what you see your North Star of inclusion and culture looking like at your company. And we can work with you all the way, from the beginning to try and move you closer to that North Star through all different types of programs. Let me think if there's anything else.
While you're thinking, one thing I wanted to tell you too is that Tony's going to come on. Tony Cohen from Button Farm is going to come on the podcast next month.
Oh, great.
And so that was Katya, Tony Cohen, Katya's team, Tony Cohen and I created with Engaged Ecology, created a really beautiful event last summer, a retreat. And Tony Cohen's the curator of Button Farm Living History Center. And he's just doing incredible work of bringing the experience of slavery, what it was like to live on a slave plantation in Maryland, recreating that experience, an immersive experience, just like the way Katya and I love creating these immersive experiences. He's done that in an incredible way all the time at Button Farm Living History Center. And so I'm really looking forward to that. I think we'll really build on this conversation too,
Yeah,
because he also has a really powerful, innovative approach to learning about our history and our inheritance too. So I'm excited for that.
it's so great. And I'm actually working with Tony. So we didn't get to dive into it in this podcast, but my other company is called Rebis, and it's an immersive experience storytelling company, truly focused on making interactive stories. And we're actually going to work with Tony to make an interactive audio experience that hopefully will be built into the experience at Button Farm. So we're all in the soup together.
And I love it that even Tony's got the gardens there too. So it's all
Yes.
there. We have a place to go and be by gardens doing this work. He teaches through gardening and farming. It's so good. And I'm just so happy that that connection is flowering. So it makes me happy to hear that.
Yeah, I'm grateful. I'm grateful for this conversation. I'm grateful to connect the dots between the world of inclusion and culture and the world of gardening and ecology. I actually think they're much more connected than we can see from far away. As you get closer to each topic, you're like, oh, nature mirrors life. Life mirrors nature.
Yes.
Humans mirror nature, and so I think another thing that anyone can do, that is the first thing that I started to do in my own process of unpacking inheritance, was also having a meditation practice and having some kind of movement practice, where through the process of meditating and moving, that's where you can uncover what obstacles you're carrying inside you. You'll stumble up against them and be like, oh, this is here and this is here and this is here. And that's a beautiful step. I think a lot of people give up there. So if I can have one final, nudge to anyone listening, it's like, it's okay to feel overwhelmed by how many aspects of self there are to work through, and you don't have to do it alone. You can do it in community. You can actually learn so much more about yourself and other people by understanding that we all have this going on inside us. If you were born, you have an inheritance. So no one's exempt from this process. So if we all are going through it together, then we can make it an experience that is connected and joyful, and a space where we can, fall apart together so that we can rebuild ourselves and emerge as beautiful butterflies. So I'll leave you with that image.
Oh, it's such a lovely coda. Thank you for ending with that. And thanks again for coming on the show today. I really appreciated this conversation.
Thanks so much, Jake.
That was my conversation with Katya Stepanov. Really inspired by that conversation and excited to work with Inheritance Project and Katya more in the future. Would love to continue this conversation in the future. Make sure to like and subscribe if you're listening to this, the audio version of this, you should also check out the videos that we're going to put out with Katya too on our YouTube channel. I'll link that below in the description box. And please do follow Inheritance Project on social media. All those will be in the descriptions too, to connect to Katya's work and to learn more. Thank you again for listening, and keep on growing.